The Galactic fleet stood victorious, their ships floating in the vast emptiness of space, their commanders celebrating what they believed was the end of a long and brutal conflict. For years, they had fought countless battles across the galaxy, facing off against alien species, monstrous forces, and even factions of their own. The war had taken its toll, but now, with the last of their enemies in retreat, the fleet's leaders believed peace was finally within their grasp. The commanders and officers gathered in the massive flagship, surrounded by the stars and the burning remnants of their fallen enemies. This ship, the Victory's Embrace, was the symbol of their power. Its enormous weapons had struck down many of their foes, and the sight of its massive size and devastating weaponry made any who dared challenge them shrink in fear. For years, this ship had been the spearhead of the fleet's efforts, tearing through anything in its path. Now it was time to relax and enjoy the fruits of their labor. "We've done it," General Tyros said with a confident grin, his voice booming across the crowded bridge of the flagship. "The galaxy is ours. No one can challenge us now." The crew cheered. The galaxy, once so full of life, now seemed empty, void of resistance. The remaining planets had either fallen in line or been crushed. All those who dared oppose the Galactic fleet had been wiped from the stars. The celebrations began, with everyone from the high-ranking officers to the lowliest of soldiers praising their own bravery and strength. But as the galaxy fell silent, a strange feeling lingered in the air. The kind of silence that unsettles even the bravest of warriors. The type of silence that warns of something unseen, something approaching from the dark edges of space. However, the officers on board the Victory's Embrace paid no mind to this unease. After all, they had done what no one else had dared to do. They had crushed every other species in the galaxy. No one was left to challenge their rule. "Orders from command, General," came the voice of one of the bridge officers. His face was pale as he glanced at the holoscreen in front of him. "It appears that there's something strange happening near the outskirts of the galaxy." Tyros waved off the officer's concerns. "Another insignificant rebellion, no doubt. Let them play their games. We've won the war." But the officer hesitated, glancing at the screen again. He was a young officer, barely out of training, and the unknown was always a source of fear. His voice trembled as he spoke again. "It's not like anything we've ever seen before, General," he said quietly. This doesn't seem like a rebellion." The general scoffed. "I don't have time for petty distractions. Let the fleet deal with it. We've earned our rest." But the officer continued to stare at the screen, his brow furrowed in confusion and fear. The display was showing an anomaly, something that shouldn't be there. An object, huge and unknown, moving steadily through space. Unlike anything the Galactic fleet had encountered before, it was heading straight toward them, a mere blip on the edge of the galaxy's edge. As Tyros dismissed the officer's concerns, a more experienced commander, Admiral Karun, stepped forward. Karun was older, more seasoned, and much more wary. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the screen, the lines on his face deepening with unease. "I think we should investigate," Admiral Karun said, his voice low. "If there's something out there, we need to know about it before it gets any closer." Tyros, now feeling a flicker of doubt creeping into his mind, looked back at the screen. But it was too late. The object was no longer a mere blip. It was growing larger, and with every passing moment, the sense of danger grew with it. The officers scrambled, and the bridge went silent as they watched the approaching object get closer and closer. No one could understand what it was. It didn't match any known ships or technology. It was too big, too advanced. They had no idea what it was, but the closer it came, the more certain they became. This was no ordinary ship. This was something far more dangerous. Tyros finally gave the order, albeit reluctantly. "Prepare the fleet for immediate action. If it's a threat, we'll destroy it before it gets any closer." As the fleet readied itself, their confidence remained high. After all, they had just defeated everyone. What could possibly be so terrifying that it would challenge the might of the galactic fleet? But just then, the unknown object moved once more, its shape becoming clearer against the backdrop of space. And as it did, the officers on the Victory's Embrace looked on in stunned disbelief. It was a ship unlike any they had ever seen. Massive, towering. Its sleek design looked almost ancient, as if it belonged to a time long past. It was built with strength, not speed. Its guns were enormous, larger than anything the galactic fleet had ever dreamed of wielding. But what struck fear into their hearts wasn't just its size. It was the unmistakable insignia on its hull. A symbol they had never expected to see. It was the emblem of Earth. The realization hit like a bolt of lightning. Humanity, a species they had all but forgotten, had returned, and they were not coming to negotiate. The fleet's celebrations came to a screeching halt. The war was far from over. It had only just begun. The realization hit like a shockwave, reverberating through the corridors of the Victory's Embrace. The galactic fleet had believed themselves to be the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. For centuries, they had dominated every race, crushed every rebellion, and left no stone unturned in their path to victory. But this was something else. The symbol emblazoned on the approaching warship's hull sent a chill down every officer's spine. It was the emblem of Earth, a planet they thought had been lost forever, a mere myth in the history books of the galaxy. How could this be possible? Humanity had vanished over 500,000 years ago. To even consider that they had survived all this time, let alone developed a fleet that could match the might of the galactic fleet, was beyond comprehension. General Tyros stood frozen, his hand still raised in the air as he had given the order to prepare for battle. His voice faltered for the first time in years. How is this possible? Humanity. Gone. Destroyed. We wiped them out. There's no way they could still be out there. His voice shook, but he refused to let his doubt show. He was the general of the fleet. He had to remain strong. Yet deep down, the thought of humanity's return gnawed at him like a festering wound. Admiral Karun was the first to speak after the stunned silence. He had been on the front lines of countless wars, seen many impossible odds, but nothing like this. I don't know what's going on, but we need to prepare for the worst. This is no simple ghost of the past. That ship, it looks like it's ready for war, and it's heading straight for us. The Victory's Embrace shuddered as its weapon systems came online, but the officers were no longer so sure of their victory. They had been confident before, but now, uncertainty crept into their hearts. What kind of ship could survive 500,000 years in space, and who were the humans that piloted it? "We've faced countless enemies, General," said Karun, his tone serious. "But nothing like this. If they've built a fleet like this in secret, we need to consider the possibility that they've been biding their time." Tyros clenched his fists, fighting to maintain control of the situation. "Send out a communication," he ordered sharply. "We need to know who they are and what they want." The communications officer quickly tapped on the console in front of her, but as the message was sent, it quickly became clear that it wasn't just a simple communication issue. The object, no, the ship, didn't respond. Instead, a series of energy pulses, faint at first, began to emanate from it. A signal. But what kind of signal? It was as if the ship was sizing them up, studying their fleet before deciding what to do next. General Tyros' pulse quickened. He knew what that meant. They were not dealing with a random wanderer. They were facing something deliberate, something planned. Admiral Karun's voice cut through the tension. "This is not a mistake. The humans, if they still call themselves that, are here for a reason. I say we prepare for battle. Full readiness." Tyros, his pride still intact, but his mind racing, slowly nodded. "Ready the fleet. No one leaves this battle unscathed. Whatever this is, we'll end it before it can threaten us." But deep inside, a nagging doubt began to grow in his mind. What if this wasn't a threat to their power? What if, just maybe, it was a wake-up call? The approaching human ship grew closer by the second, now unmistakably large, far larger than anything the Galactic fleet had ever encountered. The faint pulse of its weapon systems began to resonate through space, sending tremors across the fleet. "General," one of the bridge officers called out, "we're detecting movement on the ship, massive energy readings. They're charging their weapons." Tyros gritted his teeth. "All ships, prepare for combat. No mercy. We'll show them what happens when they try to challenge the Galactic fleet." But before the order could be fully executed, the enemy ship did something that none of them expected. Without warning, the massive dreadnought fired a single concentrated beam of energy directly at the Victory's embrace. The blast was so intense that it tore through space like a blade cutting through silk, leaving nothing but a deep scar in its wake. The fleet watched in stunned silence as the beam struck its target. The Victory's embrace shook violently, and the bridge was bathed in flashing lights as systems began to malfunction. The entire fleet seemed to freeze, momentarily paralyzed by the sheer force of the blast. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then came the command, "Return fire." The war had just taken an unexpected turn. Humanity's greatest weapon had emerged from the void, and it wasn't there to negotiate. There was no time for peace talks, no room for diplomacy. The humans weren't back to apologize. They were back to reclaim what had been taken from them. And now, the Galactic fleet would have to face the consequences of underestimating them. The war was far from over. It had just begun. The battle had begun, and the Galactic fleet was on the defensive. As the enemy's dreadnought loomed closer, General Tyros stood at the center of the command deck, his mind racing. The massive warship was far more advanced than anything they had encountered, and its power had already proven to be overwhelming. The single blast that had struck the Victory's embrace was enough to knock out several key systems, leaving the once invincible fleet in a state of chaos. "What is this?" one of the officers muttered, staring at the readouts on his console. How could they have built something like this? They were supposed to be gone, extinct. Tyros gritted his teeth. He had heard the stories, the rumors, of a once powerful human race that had been wiped out by the Galactic fleet centuries ago. But now, those rumors seemed less like history and more like a warning. Earth's power, it seemed, had never truly been erased from the galaxy. "Admiral Karun," Tyros said, his voice barely hiding the urgency, "send all ships into evasive maneuvers. We need to get away from that ship. We can't match their firepower." Karun didn't hesitate. "All ships, initiate evasive action. Get us out of range of that Dreadnought's weaponry." His voice boomed across the comms as the fleet scrambled to put distance between them and the terrifying weapon. But it was too late. The human ship was faster than anything they had encountered. Its weapons, almost surgical in their precision, fired again. This time, the blast struck the side of a smaller cruiser, splitting it in half. The remnants of the once proud ship drifted through space, the eerie silence of the void broken only by the distant hum of the human warship's engines. Tyros felt his chest tighten. The dreadnought wasn't just attacking. Its fire was deliberate, methodical. It was testing their defenses, learning their tactics. Humanity, it seemed, was far from the primitive species the Galactic fleet had believed them to be. The ship wasn't acting like a rogue vessel. It was behaving like an experienced military force, one that knew exactly how to strike fear into the hearts of its enemies. "Admiral Karun," Tyros barked, his voice shaking. "Return fire. We have no choice. We cannot let them continue this assault." The order was given, and the Victory's embrace fired its main cannon, the powerful beam of energy shooting toward the human dreadnought. But it barely made a dent. The ship's shields absorbed the attack with ease, flickering for only a moment before regenerating completely. The crew of the Victory's embrace was left in stunned disbelief. "They're blocking our shots," an officer whispered. "How is that possible?" Tyros's mind raced. This wasn't just about winning a battle. This was a fight for survival. The humans had technology beyond anything they had ever seen. If they could survive for 500,000 years and somehow rebuild a fleet this advanced, they were no longer the easy prey the Galactic fleet had assumed. "Sir, we've got incoming," another officer shouted. Another ship just emerged from the human dreadnought. It wasn't just one ship, it was an entire fleet. As the human dreadnought opened fire again, smaller warships and support vessels materialized from the shadows, each one appearing to be a perfect match for the dreadnought in design and power. It was clear now that this was no random encounter. This was a calculated assault, a calculated return to war. Tyros clenched his fists. The Galactic fleet had always prided itself on its overwhelming numbers, its superior tactics, and its unmatched firepower. But nothing in their training had prepared them for this. The humans weren't playing by the same rules. They were smart, ruthless, and capable of adapting faster than any species they had ever faced. "We're being flanked," one of the tactical officers called out. "We need reinforcements now." But it was already too late. The human fleet had already begun to close in, and there was nowhere left to run. The Galactic fleet was surrounded. "Prepare to engage in hand-to-hand combat," Tyros commanded, his voice now colder than ever. "This will be a fight to the death." But even as he gave the orders, Tyros couldn't shake the feeling that the humans weren't just here to fight. They were here to reclaim something that was theirs. This wasn't just a battle. It was a war. And the Galactic fleet had made a grave mistake by underestimating humanity's ability to rise from the ashes. The battle raged on, and the Galactic fleet's situation was growing increasingly dire. Tyros could feel the weight of the command on his shoulders, every decision feeling like it could be the last. The human dreadnought, now surrounded by a swarm of smaller ships, was proving to be an unstoppable force. The fleet's tactical advantage was slipping away, and their advanced weapons seemed useless against the human ship's superior technology. The once proud fleet of the Galactic Council had boasted some of the most powerful warships in the galaxy, but now they were little more than sitting ducks. The human dreadnought continued its assault, its weapons tearing through the outer layers of the Galactic fleet's ships with ease. But what made it even more terrifying was the calm, methodical nature of the attack. There was no panic, no sense of desperation. Humanity, it seemed, had been biding its time. Tyros gritted his teeth as the shields of the Victory's embrace flickered once more, this time threatening to fail completely. He knew that if the shields went down, the ship would be a sitting target. The enemy ships were closing in on all sides, leaving them no room to maneuver. "Report," Tyros barked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're losing power in several key systems, sir," the chief engineer responded, her voice tense. "Shields are at 30% and dropping fast. The engines are struggling to maintain speed." Tyros's heart sank. They were running out of time. If they didn't do something drastic, they would be wiped out. "Get me a status report on the fleet," Tyros demanded. His communications officer quickly worked the controls. "Fleet is in disarray, sir. Several ships have already been destroyed. The remaining forces are attempting to regroup, but they're too scattered. The human fleet is closing in on all sides." Tyros knew they couldn't hold out for much longer. He had to act, and fast. But just as he began to consider their next move, a loud siren blared across the command deck, signaling an incoming transmission. "Put it through," Tyros ordered, his voice grim. The view screen flickered to life, and a holographic figure appeared in front of him. It was the face of an older human man, dressed in military garb. His features were stern, his eyes cold and calculating. Tyros had no doubt that this was the commander of the human dreadnought. "This is Admiral Reed." The man's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "To the leader of the Galactic fleet, I offer you a simple choice: surrender or face complete destruction. You have 10 minutes to comply." Tyros's eyes narrowed. The audacity of this human. To offer terms of surrender when they were the ones being overrun was a sign of supreme confidence. The humans didn't just want victory. They wanted submission. They wanted the Galactic fleet to grovel before them. "Tell him we'll never surrender," Tyros muttered, his voice thick with anger. But the human admiral's words cut through his fury. "We are not asking for your surrender for mercy's sake. We are offering it because we know the power you hold, the power we once feared. This is a warning. This is your last chance to avoid total annihilation. Do not mistake our offer for weakness." Tyros felt a chill run down his spine. The human admiral wasn't just making a threat. He was offering a truth. The Earth had been thought to be gone, wiped from the face of the galaxy long ago. The destruction of humanity had been so complete that the Galactic fleet had forgotten them, believing the humans to be nothing more than a distant memory. But now, centuries later, they were back, stronger, more deadly than ever. The offer made Tyros uneasy, and he knew his fleet was feeling it too. There was no more arrogance left. The terrifying realization had set in that they were up against a force unlike any they had ever encountered. "We're at a crossroads. Admiral," the human's voice continued, his tone cold and firm. "You have 10 minutes to make your choice. If you reject our offer, we will end this war in a way you will never forget. Your fleet, your people, your entire galaxy will be nothing but ashes." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the room in heavy silence. Tyros felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The choice before him was simple but devastating. To surrender now would mean humiliation for the Galactic fleet and a future where humanity ruled with an iron fist. To reject the offer was to throw everything into one final desperate battle, one they might not survive. "Admiral," his communications officer said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Tyros clenched his fists. There was no easy answer, but one thing was clear. This battle was no longer just about the Galactic fleet's survival. This was about confronting humanity's resurgence and whether they would accept their place in the galaxy or fight to the bitter end. The final ultimatum had been issued, and the fate of the galaxy rested in his hands. The tension on the bridge of the Victory's embrace was palpable. Tyros stared at the empty view screen for a moment longer, the weight of the human admiral's words echoing in his mind. His crew waited for his orders, the silence hanging thick in the air. Every second felt like an eternity. "Admiral," the voice of his second in command, Commander Vorn, broke the silence. "What are we going to do?" "They're not bluffing. Those dreadnoughts are real. We've seen their firepower. They can wipe us out without hesitation." Tyros clenched his jaw. He had heard the fear in his crew's voices, and it was no surprise. The human fleet had appeared from nowhere, and its might was unlike anything they had ever encountered. But surrender, that was not an option. "We'll never surrender," Tyros said, his voice firm. "That's not an option for us. We're the Galactic fleet. We've survived countless wars, faced overwhelming odds, and we've always come out victorious. This is no different." "But they destroyed 3 of our largest ships in less than an hour, Admiral. We barely made it out alive." "We can't take them head on," Vorn insisted. Tyros was quiet for a moment. The report on the damage had been grim. The Victory's embrace was one of the most powerful ships in the fleet, yet even it had been pushed to the brink. The human ships were unlike anything they had ever faced, armored, fast, and deadly. It was a miracle they had survived this long. "We need to think strategically," Tyros said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "This is no longer a battle of numbers. We can't match their firepower or their size. We have to outsmart them." The crew looked at each other, uncertain but hopeful. Tyros had led them through wars before, but this was different. The odds seemed impossible, but in his eyes there was a spark of something. The same spark that had pushed him through every other battle. Hope, even in the darkest of moments. "Prepare the fleet for a counteroffensive," Tyros ordered. "We need to buy time to regroup and access the full potential of our remaining ships. If we can disrupt their formation, it might give us the upper hand." Vorn nodded, though her expression remained anxious. And the humans? What should we do about them? Tyros thought for a moment, a plan slowly forming in his mind. We'll do what we do best, fight. But we won't go at them head-on. We need to use our speed and agility. We'll pull them into a trap. The crew hesitated for only a brief moment before springing into action. The Victory's embrace might have been a symbol of power, but it was still a ship, and with that came the need to make tough decisions. They had to fight smart, not just hard. Captain, the human ships are closing in. The sensors officer reported, her voice tight with urgency. They're concentrating their fire on the outer ships in our fleet. Tyros' eyes narrowed. They were being methodical. It was clear now that the humans had no intention of making mistakes. Every action they took was calculated, their every move designed to strip away any hope the Galactic fleet had left. But Tyros wasn't about to let his fleet go down without a fight. He turned to Vorn. Let's do this. All ships, prepare to initiate the flanking maneuver on my mark. They're going to wish they'd never made the mistake of underestimating us. As he spoke, Tyros felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. In this moment, he wasn't thinking about the thousands of lives at stake or the destruction that loomed over them. He was focused on one thing: survival. This was what he was trained for. This was what he had fought for. To lead, to make decisions that would determine the fate of billions. He would not let the human dreadnoughts have the last word. The crew readied themselves, their eyes focused, their hands steady. Tyros' mind raced as he calculated the next moves, the angles, the strategy. He knew they were outgunned, but they weren't out of options yet. Now, he shouted. With one command, the fleet shifted into action. Ships scattered, some breaking away from the human ships to launch a series of feints and decoys, while others raced to create new lines of defense. The Victory's embrace remained in the center, moving with a grace and agility that defied its size. The Dreadnoughts followed, chasing, but not yet ready for what was to come. Tyros watched from the command deck as the battle unfolded before him. It was a desperate play, one that could either save them or seal their fate. The humans had underestimated them once before, but now they were testing the limits of their intelligence, their resolve, and their will to fight. The next moments felt like a blur of chaos and fire, but Tyros stayed calm. This was the only option, the only way to stand a chance against an unstoppable enemy. They would not bow, not yet. And in the depths of space, as the battle raged on, one thing became clear to Tyros. This was a war that had only just begun. The tension in the command room reached its peak as Tyros watched the unfolding battle on the massive view screen. The Victory's embrace had taken the lead, with its fleet of ships surrounding the human dreadnoughts. The decoys and feints had worked, at least for now. The human fleet had split, chasing after the fakes, giving the Galactic fleet a momentary advantage. But that advantage was fleeting. Admiral, Vorn's voice broke through his thoughts. The human ships are regrouping. They're adjusting their tactics. It won't be long before they realize the trap. Tyros nodded, his face grim. We know. We're counting on it. The humans were smart. Too smart. They would learn fast, adapt, and strike back with even more precision. The longer they could keep them engaged, the better chance they'd have of turning the tables. But it wouldn't last forever. Bring the second wave into position, Tyros ordered. We can't let them regroup too quickly. The second wave consisted of the most agile ships in the fleet. They were fast and equipped with advanced cloaking technology. The idea was simple: slip past the human ships, strike at their flanks, and force them into a retreat. The element of surprise had always been the Galactic fleet's strongest weapon, but the humans weren't like the other enemies they had faced. They could anticipate moves before they were made, and their warships, these dreadnoughts, had defenses the fleet had never encountered before. Tyros leaned forward in his chair, his mind racing. He had seen countless battles, but something about this one was different. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting with a purpose. They were organized, relentless, and they had something the Galactic fleet didn't: a hidden strength. "Admiral," came the voice of the tactical officer, "we've detected a new energy signature. It's coming from the human dreadnoughts." Tyros' stomach twisted. What kind of signature? "It's massive. A power surge we haven't seen before. They're preparing something, but we're not sure what it is." The crew fell silent, exchanging worried glances. Tyros' gut told him that whatever the humans were about to unleash, it would be devastating. "Increase our shields to full power," he commanded. "Prepare for anything." But in the back of his mind, Tyros knew it wasn't enough. The humans had already proven that their weapons could pierce even the strongest of shields. They had shown no mercy in their first attack. And now, with their new energy surge, they might just have something that would obliterate the Galactic fleet. "Admiral," Vorn's voice interrupted his thoughts, "we've lost contact with the second wave." Tyros' heart skipped a beat. The second wave was supposed to be their trump card. Without them, their chances of victory were slipping away. "Find them," Tyros ordered, his voice sharp. "I want every ship in that sector to engage now." But even as he gave the order, Tyros felt the weight of their situation. The second wave had been wiped out. In a matter of seconds, they had vanished, leaving nothing but the cold void of space in their wake. The humans were not playing by the rules. They were using every tactic they could to ensure their survival. Every attack they launched was calculated, designed to break the Galactic fleet down, piece by piece. Just then, the Dreadnoughts revealed their trump card. The massive energy surge expanded across the battlefield, forming a dazzling energy wave that cut through space like a blade. Tyros' breath caught in his throat. He knew what this was. "Brace yourselves," he shouted to his crew. "It's a planetary-scale weapon." The Dreadnoughts were about to unleash something powerful enough to annihilate entire fleets. The energy pulse they had just emitted was unlike anything Tyros had ever seen. It was designed to disintegrate ships, destroy entire battalions in an instant. The warning alarms blared, but it was too late. The energy pulse shot toward them with terrifying speed. Tyros' heart raced, and in that moment, he knew they were at the mercy of the humans. If this weapon hit, there would be no survivors. "Divert all power to the rear shields," Tyros yelled. "Get us out of the blast zone." The Victory's embrace struggled to move as the energy pulse raced toward them, closing the distance at an alarming rate. The ship's engines roared, struggling to increase speed, but it wasn't enough. The pulse was too close. In a desperate bid to escape, Tyros pressed a button on his console. "Initiate evasive maneuvers." The ship veered hard to the left, narrowly dodging the first wave of energy. But the Dreadnoughts weren't finished. Another surge of energy followed closely behind, and this time there was nowhere to run. Tyros closed his eyes, bracing for impact. He had led his crew into countless battles. But this was different. This time, the enemy wasn't just another invader. This time, they were fighting humanity itself, an enemy that would show no mercy. The ship shook violently as the pulse made contact. Tyros gritted his teeth, expecting the worst. He could feel the heat of the blast through the reinforced hull. The Victory's embrace groaned under the pressure, but it held together, defying the odds. "We're alive," Vorn said, her voice barely a whisper. "Admiral, we're alive." Tyros blinked, his mind still reeling from the impact. The Dreadnought's weapon had hit them with devastating force, but they had survived. For now. But Tyros knew one thing for certain: the human Dreadnoughts were not to be underestimated. If they had this kind of power, the battle was far from over. And whatever humanity had planned next, the Galactic fleet would need everything they had to stand a chance. Tyros stood at the command center, watching the blinking lights that illuminated the ship's control panels. The Victory's embrace had taken a heavy beating from the human Dreadnoughts, but it was still operational. The blast from the energy pulse had devastated their external shields, and they had been lucky to survive the initial wave. Now, with the ship groaning under the strain, Tyros knew they couldn't take another hit like that. "Admiral," Vorn's voice cut through his thoughts. "We've managed to reroute power to the shields, but they're at critical levels. We can't take another hit." Tyros clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Galactic Fleet's reputation had always been one of invincibility, but this battle had shaken that confidence to its core. The humans were proving to be more than just a nuisance. They were a real threat, and their dreadnoughts were more powerful than anything Tyros had encountered before. "We need to regroup," Tyros muttered, running his fingers through his hair. "Rally the remaining forces. I want every ship ready for a counterattack." Vorn nodded and quickly passed the order to the fleet. Tyros turned his gaze back to the view screen, watching as the human dreadnoughts held their position. They were confident, almost calm in their movements. It was as if they knew their victory was inevitable. But Tyros wasn't ready to concede defeat just yet. He had seen the Galactic Fleet recover from worse situations, and he wasn't about to let humanity's unexpected power break them now. He'd been in battles where all hope seemed lost, only for a glimmer of victory to emerge at the last possible moment. It was the hallmark of the Galactic Fleet's tenacity. The view screen shifted, showing the scattered remnants of their fleet. A few ships had already retreated, but many still hovered near the battlefront, battered but ready to fight. Tyros knew that now was the time to strike. If they could get in close to the human dreadnoughts, they could potentially disable their weapon systems. The dreadnoughts were strong, but they weren't invincible. "Bring our ships into position," Tyros ordered. "We're going in. Full speed ahead. We'll force them into a retreat." His crew exchanged nervous glances, but they followed his orders without question. Tyros's mind raced as he tried to come up with a new strategy. The human dreadnoughts had shown their might, but he knew they were vulnerable in ways that could be exploited. He just had to find a way in. As the victory's embrace surged forward, Tyros's thoughts were interrupted by a new signal from their long-range sensors. "Admiral," the sensor officer called, "new enemy ships incoming. They're not human, but they're aligned with them." Tyros's heart skipped a beat. More enemies. His instincts told him this wasn't just another typical wave of reinforcements. This felt different. The ships had the same energy signature as the human dreadnoughts, something the Galactic Fleet hadn't encountered before. "Where are they coming from?" Tyros demanded. "Unknown," the officer replied, her voice tense. "They have arrived just outside our fleet's perimeter." Tyros's mind raced. This was not a good sign. Humanity's dreadnoughts had already caught them off guard once, and now these new ships were adding an entirely new layer of unpredictability to the situation. He knew that they had to act fast. The more time they spent trying to figure out their new enemies, the more vulnerable they would become. "Divert all available power to our weapons," Tyros ordered. "I want all ships locked on to the new arrivals. Prepare for combat. We'll deal with whatever these ships are after we've finished with the dreadnoughts." The crew worked swiftly, following orders with practiced precision. But Tyros could feel the tension building in the air. They were now fighting not just for survival, but for the future of the Galactic Fleet itself. The new enemy ships slowly moved into position. Their designs were unfamiliar, unlike anything the Galactic Fleet had ever seen. They were sleek and built for speed, gliding through space with deadly intent. The lights on the ships flickered as if to signal their readiness. "Prepare for engagement," Tyros said through gritted teeth. "Hold nothing back." Suddenly, the human dreadnoughts opened fire again, their massive weapons discharging a blast so powerful it shook the entire victory's embrace. Tyros's grip tightened on the edge of the console as he braced for impact, but this time, the shields held strong. The damage was minimal, but he knew they couldn't take many more hits like that. "Evasive maneuvers," Tyros shouted. Now, the ship lurched as it shifted position, narrowly avoiding another barrage. The new enemy ships began to attack, their weapons precise and deadly. The battle was escalating, and Tyros's thoughts were consumed by one question. How much longer could they hold on? He glanced back at the view screen, watching as the human dreadnoughts and their allies advanced. This battle was far from over, but Tyros knew one thing for certain. The fight for the Galactic fleet's survival had just taken a darker turn. And now, with the pressure mounting, the true test of their strength was about to begin. Would the fleet survive the combined might of humanity's warships, or would this battle mark the end of an era for the Galactic fleet? Only time would tell.